How's it going, everyone? It is I, Anime Outlet, and this is part 1 of What If Deku Had a Cat Quirk. And now before I start this What If off, I'd like to say I'm sorry for making you all wait 5 days for another one of my videos to come out. I would also like to say I am looking for a thumbnail maker, so I've linked my channel Discord down in the description below. So if you want to see more details on just how I'm looking for a thumbnail maker, just go and click my Discord invite link down in the description below and join the channel Discord, and you can see all of the details there. And now, let's begin. Izuku would be born into the Midoriya family, as he would have two striking differences between him and his mother. His mother would have no ears or tail, while Izuku had ears and a tail when he was born. So now I'm going to just explain to you all what Izuku's quirk is. Now, Izuku has two striking appearances that show off that he has a quirk and that he was born with one, those being his cat ears on the top of his head and the tail that he has on his backside. So, these just things that change with when Izuku changes into a different type of cat. So, this would also mean Izuku can change into any type of cat that is labeled as a cat. So, say Izuku wants to become a lion, he can transform into a lion, and then when he goes back into his human form, his ears on the top of his head and the tail would be a lion ears and a lion tail. Or if he became, say, a panther, he would have panther ears and a panther tail. That's how his quirk works. And he can transform different parts of his body. Say if he wanted a lion claw on his left hand, he could do that. However, he couldn't make another one or a different type of cat claw on his other hand. So if he had a lion claw for his left hand, he would have to have a lion claw for his right hand if he wanted another claw for there. Same thing would go for his feet, having to match up with what he has on his hands, or his hands having to match up what is on his feet. So Izuku would grow up having a pretty normal childhood, except being born with a quirk. A lot of people would actually think Izuku was really cute just because of his quirk that he had from his birth. And so Izuku wouldn't really like all of the affection and attention he was getting, as it was just something he didn't really like, as his mother had taught him not to brag or just to show off a lot, but this was basically just being even more of a distraction, as he really wanted to focus on being a hero. Sorry about that, my cat conveniently just jumped up on my bed out of nowhere and started to attack my blinds, and now he's coming right at me. So Izuku would just grow up not really liking how much just attention he was getting, especially in the preschool that he was at. So when Izuku would finally turn 4, he would get excited to know all of the details about his quirk. So he would immediately jump up out of his bed on his birthday, rushing into his mother's room. His father was absent since his birth, as it was his father's side that had the cat details, as his father's side actually had a history of cat-like and animal-like quirks. So Izuku would end up going to the quirk doctor, as Inko had made him wait. He woke up at 6 a.m., and since the doctor's office didn't open till 10, she had to wait 4 hours with a very excited and energetic Izuku. So when they finally made it to the doctor's office, they would walk in as Izuku would be rushed into just a room, as he would end up being told what his quirk was after a couple of tests had been done. Izuku's quirk would turn out to be a cat quirk, no surprise there, as the doctor would then explain to Inko and Izuku Midoriya all of the details about just what his quirk was, basically what I had just explained to you all. So Izuku would end up growing up like this. However, once he went into school, when having his quirk, while a lot of the other kids still hadn't developed their quirks yet. However, something that would grow in and just cause Izuku to start hating almost everyone was a kid by the name of Bakugo Katsuki, as Bakugo Katsuki just tormented Izuku for how he looked because of his cat Quirk. And this happened ever since Bakugo developed his explosion Quirk. Since Bakugo didn't really have a quirk before, just about a week before the torment started, so once Bakugo developed his quirk, he started to torment Izuku. They were actually quite good friends before Bakugo had a quirk. But now that Bakugo had such a flashy and cool looking quirk, he just decided to start bullying Izuku. And since everyone saw Bakugo was such a powerful and just a leader type person, they just didn't want to get on his bad side. So they would all just laugh and play along with what Izuku was saying. Many of the people not wanting to do it, but still would in fear of retaliation from Bakugo. So this is where bullying would end up starting, as Bakugo would end up just bullying Izuku because of how he looks and because of what his quirk was. As in Bakugo's eyes, Izuku's quirk was just a weak little cat quirk, so he's just some house cat that he can just bat away with the back of his hand. So Bakugo would end up tormenting Izuku. However, Izuku wouldn't end up having any more of this when he was 7. Izuku would grow up really liking food and just cooking in general. His mother had taught him how to cook from a very young age, wanting Izuku to be very independent from as young age as possible, as she had to work many jobs and she couldn't really be home all the time. So Izuku would end up learning just how to cook and just eat food so he can end up growing stronger. This is another one of his main goals, as he really wanted to get super strong to become a hero, much like All Might, someone he had idolized since he was just at a very young age, since he was even like 2 or 3. So Izuku would end up eating a lot of like protein things and all these types of like pastas and things just so he could try to get stronger, along with doing some simple training that was basically enough for a 7-year-old. And so when Bakugo had decided to smack Izuku's food out of his hand, something that he had made for hours, just trying to prepare it all the night before, Izuku decided he had enough of this, as Izuku would attack Bakugo, as he would scratch Bakugo across the face, as Izuku's scratch mark across Bakugo's cheek would be very deep, leaving scratch marks along Bakugo's cheek, leaving scars. So Izuku would end up being sent to the principal's office, while Bakugo would end up being sent to the health room, as when Bakugo recovered, he would face no repercussions, even though everyone had saw what he had did, even the teachers. That's how scary a 7-year-old Bakugo was, as his quirk had developed into something insane at the age of 7. He was impressively powerful, and like no one thought they could stop him. Even teachers who had had years of experience with using their quirks, and plus they didn't want to use it on a 7-year-old. And so they just let it slide for Bakugo, but with Izuku, he was just expelled right on the spot. So when Izuku was walking home, his mother would be looking at him, just glaring with hatred down towards Izuku, right up at their apartment's door, as Izuku would walk up the stairs and would look up at his mother as he would try to explain to her what had happened, but she would be having none of that. Shush, she would say right at Izuku, as Izuku would look on wondering what he had done. Sure, he knew what he was doing, but why wasn't she letting him explain what his story was? And so after she said this, she would say, "You just put dishonor on our family name, Izuku. How dare you put such a disrespect on the Mentorias? I don't want to see you again. Leave." As Izuku would look on shocked, he was incredibly intelligent for his age, and he was just being told, a 7-year-old, mind you, that he is no longer welcome in their family household because he acted out once. 7-year-olds and just growing kids will act out so many times. It's just something that happens while growing because they haven't learned not to do that. And plus, Izuku was acting out in self-defense, mind you, but they just neglected to tell Inko this, and so Izuku would end up rushing down the apartment steps and rushing into the forest that was right next to just their house, as Izuku would end up just not crying, but he would end up growing a hatred and desire to just not want to be with anybody. He just started a very distrust. He just didn't trust anybody from there on. As Zuko, after being betrayed by his very own mother, someone he loved dearly and held closely to his heart, was now just betraying him and telling him that he was no longer welcome in her family, as if she just didn't love him anymore. Izuku just couldn't handle this, so he'd rush out into the forest, and this is where he would transform for the first time ever, as he would transform into a mountain lion, as he would easily be able to get around just all of the trees and obstacles in this forest. As Izuku would then stop to look on as he was in just a massive, beautiful forest. As Izuku would smile, finally being at peace. This is where he belonged. As Izuku would jump down a little hill and would rush at a deer. It was just an instinct that Izuku had to do, as he would swipe at the deer before grabbing down, biting on its neck, killing the deer as Izuku had just found himself a meal. As Izuku would start to eat, as he would then just sit down next to it before falling asleep. As Izuku would now just be smiling, wondering what he could do next, as Izuku would transform back into his human form, as his ears and tail had just changed from a normal tabby cat ear and tail to a mountain lion ear and tail, as Izuku would just be sitting there wondering what he should do, as he would end up living a life much like just a lion or a mountain lion, something that just lives off the land. He was like an actual animal, as he would go around hunting animals each and every day, just trying to just get as much strength as possible with training, because he knew he was going to become a hero. Nothing was going to stop him from reaching his dreams. Not anybody. Despite what his mother had done, he wasn't going to let that get through to him. And so 8 years would end up passing, as Izuku would end up turning 15, as he would end up going to just some random place, as this was the first time in a while Izuku had been in an actual civilization. Sure, Izuku had gone to the library and stolen a bunch of books, as they really couldn't do anything about a lion just who supposedly escaped from the city zoo walking into the library, which caused the entire staff to evacuate. So when Izuku who looked like a child walked out with a bunch of books, no one was really suspecting anything, as Izuku would end up learning through books. He wasn't just a product of the common education. He was a product of books made by very famous and smart people. So Izuku grew to not just be someone just smart on the basic knowledge taught to you by school, but someone who was built off of problem solving and all of these. As Izuku grew up off of problem solving, he had to problem solve almost every day to try and hunt for his food. He had to figure out if he's going to have to jump in the river to catch a fish, or if he's going to have to chase down a deer or some other type of animal so he can eat for the day. Izuku grew up like this, as he would end up being one of the smartest kids in just all of Japan, as none of them grew up with having to go through such hardships and having to learn so quickly on how to deal with problems. So Izuku would end up walking into the city. He already knew his way around, having studied it just a couple weeks beforehand. So when Izuku had made it to the UA campus, he would end up walking on as no one suspected a thing. Izuku hadn't signed up for the entrance exam, however, he was still going to attempt it, as Izuku would end up just walking in, as he would just sit down in the auditorium, where he would be explained the written exam before having it all passed out to all of the students there. As Izuku wouldn't even take this exam. He knew that his mother probably said something like he died in a freak accident or he just disappeared. And so if he were to write his name down, that really wouldn't make too much sense. So Izuku just bothered not to do it, as he would say if he were to make it in, they would just make him do that again, as he was really only going to show his skills in the battlefield, as he really wasn't going to even do the written exam. He was just going to let his skills do the talking. So when the hero exam had started, Izuku would rush into the city, transforming into a lion, as he would end up rushing out and just attacking all of these robots with his massive claws, easily tearing through the very, very soft metal. This wasn't like a very hard metal at all. Hold on. My cat hit the blinds again, so just having to stop him from doing that. So Izuku would easily be able to tear through all of this metal, as Zuko would easily be able to tear through all of this metal, as it wasn't a very hard metal at all. It was designed to be very soft, so that the students could easily break through it. And so Izuku would easily be able to tear through all of this metal, easily going around destroying all of the robots in his sight, as many of the students around him would end up saying, "Oh, of course, that kid with the very strong Quirk is going to get number 1 in this exam. We'll probably have no chance compared to students like him," as Izuku would easily run around destroying all the robots, as he would end up coming across a massive robot right in front of him. Izuku would hear a scream of some girl, as he would end up rushing over to where he heard it, as he would see that he was rushing towards the giant robot he had just saw. And so he really wouldn't care about this at all, as he had faced something he deemed to be much worse, and telling how weak the other robots were, this robot couldn't really be much stronger. So Izuku would end up rushing towards this giant robot before rushing up its leg before making it to its arm, barely grabbing onto its arm before rushing over to where its neck was, as he would scratch open the neck area, seeing a bunch of wires, as Izuku would grab these wires with his lion paws before just shredding all of these wires, as the robot would end up just deactivating before falling down to the ground. As Izuku would then see this girl falling in the air, as he would twist back and would catch the girl with his paws before bringing her into his chest, as he would then just stop falling, as he would look over to see the girl who had touched him, as she would then just hop out of his grasp before saying release, as Izuku would fall right back onto his feet to see her just saying thank you for saving me. Izuku would say it was no problem, as he had done stuff like this all the time, which was clearly a lie. He had been in the forest the whole time and really hadn't saved anything at all. He had really just been the opposite of saving things, killing them, so that he could eat. I mean, it was all part of just the natural system, as Izuku really couldn't care less, as Izuku would end up walking out after hearing the bell ring, signifying the end of the hero exams. So Izuku would end up walking out, as he would end up going back into the forest, which was conveniently right next to the UA campus. So Izuku would end up transforming into a mountain lion before rushing back into the forest. And so a couple weeks would end up passing, as we cut to see Nezu in his office analyzing footage, as we can see him look at Izuku transform into a mountain lion before rushing off into the forest right next to the UA campus, as Nezu would point at this mountain lion and would tell Aizawa he wants him to bring that lion to just UA, as Aizawa would look at Nezu just as if he was kidding. "You really want me to bring a mountain lion in?" As Nezu hadn't shown him the picture or just the video of this mountain lion going from Izuku to the mountain lion. He hadn't shown him that. He had just shown him a picture of the mountain lion, telling him to bring it in to UA. And so Aizawa would end up bringing this mountain lion in, as Izuku would end up being just in a cage, as he would end up transforming back into his human form before looking over to see Nezu standing in front of the cage, as he would release him, telling him that he has been accepted into UA, and he would also like to ask why he transformed into his lion form and rushed off into the forest. As Izuku would then start his life story, saying how he was just abandoned at the age of 7 because he attacked some kid by the name of Katsuki Bakugo, since Bakugo had slapped the food that he had made for hours out of his hands, and so he attacked Bakugo since he was just angry, as Bakugo had just started his relentless bullying for something like this over and over again ever since Bakugo had gotten his quirk when he was 4. And so Izuku would be telling Nezu this, as Nezu would just start to nod his head, as he would end up leaving after telling Izuku he made it into UA, not really caring how smart Izuku was or not. Izuku had too much potential to be wasted on if Izuku was smart or had a high IQ or not. So Nezu would end up walking over to one of his other teachers, this being the cement teacher. I don't want to bother saying the name, as I usually always say it wrong. So Nezu would tell this teacher if he can start to build up the dorms, as they'll have another 2 weeks before the school starts up and before the school season starts, so if he can make the dorms before that for all of the classes, including the 3rd years, that would be great. As Nezu would end up walking over to a meeting room where he had called Aizawa too, as Nezu would end up bringing in Izuku into the room, as Izuku was as much as confused as Aizawa was. So Aizawa, meet your new roommate, Izuku here, as Izuku would say, huh? As Nezu would just start to laugh, as Izuku would say, wait, how do you know my name? Well, I decided to do some research after seeing what you looked like, and yeah, there was a kid named Izuku Midoriya, with the mother Inko Midoriya. It all matched up with your story. Still was surprised you didn't tell me your names, though. Well, you're in luck, however. Your mother did die a couple of years ago, which I'm sure you're not sad or happy about, but it's just news you won't have to deal with knowing your mother is alive and could be pesky to you in the future. So now, welcome to UA. And Aizawa, I suggest you start meeting Izuku and just getting to know him, since you'll be living with him for the next 2 weeks, at least until the UA dorms are finished. So Aizawa would just roll his eyes, knowing this is just some antics Nezu has been up to again, as Aizawa would end up telling Izuku to follow him, as Izuku would then transform into a house cat before jumping onto Aizawa's shoulder. Izuku really couldn't care less what people thought about him, much less what Aizawa thought about him. Aizawa is still a stranger, and he really couldn't care if someone thought he was a bit weird or not. This is a world where so many people have mutations or other things with their quirks. The entire world is weird. There's all these weird occurrences. Who cares if someone just sees him in their eyes as a bit strange? So Izuku would end up hopping onto Aizawa's shoulder as a small house cat, as Aizawa would end up walking him to his apartment building, which, conveniently enough, was in the exact same apartment building as Inko's old house, and it just happened to be the exact same apartment, as Izuku would end up jumping off of Aizawa's shoulder, transforming back into a human before looking on. So, when did you get this place? A few years ago. Why? That's when I started teaching at UA. Aizawa would respond, it's kind of ironic, really. This is the exact same apartment I lived in until I was 7. Wait, what? Aizawa would say in shock. You used to live here? Yeah, I did. If I remember correctly, there should be a hole in some closet. It was there when my mother bought the house. As she always told me that's where monsters lived, and if I misbehaved, they'd come and get me. It's kind of strange looking back on all these old memories, finally realizing who the monster my mother was, Izuku would say, as he would end up walking over to the closet, as Aizawa would then see just this closet having a massive gaping hole in it, revealing a just pipe going up to the second or the upper floor that was above them, as Aizawa would just say, huh, so I guess that's all the proof that you do live here. Well, I guess you can just make yourself at home. You already really know where everything is, and that you can remember something from so far back in the time. As Aizawa would just go over and sit on the couch before taking a nap, as Izuku would end up just looking around for food before seeing nothing, as he would end up grabbing a paper plate, as he would put some goldfish that he had found in the pantry before putting some cheese on top of this before popping it into a microwave, as he would then sit this just food down before turning into a cat and would start to eat it, as Izuku really couldn't care less. Food is food, and he really couldn't be picky out in the wild where a catch like a small rabbit you might only get, and you might go with catchless for a couple days after that. You have to eat everything you can, as it's the wild and no one's going to care or have sympathy for someone like a lion who is a predator out there who is going to kill them if they just show them any sympathy. So Izuku would end up eating this, as Aizawa would look at Izuku in kind of disgust. What is that you're eating? Oh, I don't know, I just found whatever food you had here and just threw it together. That's pretty much all I did. I used my basic knowledge on how to use a microwave from years back to just warm it up. It's not the greatest, but it definitely could be worse. As Aizawa would look down before getting out his hand from under a blanket before reaching towards this food, as he would end up grabbing the just cheese-covered goldfish, just wondering what was this, as he would see Zuko looking at him, as Izuku would say, you want some? As Aizawa would really just not say anything before dropping the piece of goldfish bag, before just going back under the blanket and falling back asleep. So Izuku would end up not really caring, as he would end up going to bed soon after this, as Izuku would end up sleeping before waking up very early and opening up a window out of the guest room that he was staying in, as he would end up jumping out of this window and rushing off into the forest. It was now time to start the hunt that he had been doing for the past 8 years. He'd wake up very early and would start hunting for any sorts of animals that he could find. And sure enough, he found a small rabbit, as he would end up grabbing this with his teeth before bringing it back to just the apartment, as he would end up jumping back onto the balcony after jumping from balcony to balcony, as he would finally reach Aizawa's floor, as he would end up jumping on into it, looking over to where Aizawa was looking frantically for Izuku. He knew if Izuku had escaped, Nezu was going to kill him. So when Izuku came back with a rabbit and would then toss it onto the ground and would start to eat it, Aizawa would just be like, did you really have to leave to go get that? Well, yeah, Izuku would respond. You have no food here. I mean, this is way better than that monstrosity that I just made randomly. No, look in your fridge. You have nothing, Izuku would say. I really can't eat nothing that has no nutritional value at all for someone like a growing hero who needs to gain strength and muscle. As Aizawa would just shake his head, wondering how he got stuck in such a stupid situation. So Izuku would end up just sitting there eating the rabbit that he caught. 2 weeks later, the UA school season would end up starting. I really can't remember the UA school year. Let's call it the season. The UA school year would end up starting as Izuku would move out from Aizawa's apartment and would move into the UA dorms, being the first one to do so as they had finished a week early, as he would end up moving in, staying there for the past week. So when the orientation day would end up starting, Aizawa would tell them that they're not going to do the orientation for another week, pushing back that so all of the students could get to know each other in the dorm rooms. So Izuku would end up just be staying there, not bothering to go to school, as he hadn't even received a schedule. So when a bunch of people started to move all of their stuff in, and when all of the students just happened to see a house cat sleeping on the couch, as many of them would crowd around Zuko, many of these being the female students of Class 1A. Many of the male counterparts really just didn't bother and really just wanted to stay in their own room and not bother with anything else. However, Bakugo, hearing that there was a cat in there, had decided to take a look. Ever since he had just seen and gotten just scarred by Zuko, he had had a hatred for cats. So when Zuko would end up waking up, Bakugo would instantly realize who this was, as the eyes instantly made Bakugo realize. Zuko would transform into just sort of a bigger type of cat. It wasn't as big as something like a mountain lion, but it wasn't as small as a house cat, as Izuku would tackle Bakugo before slamming him up on the wall, as many of the students would wonder what Bakugo had done to this cat, as Izuku would drop Bakugo down before transforming back into his human form. So, it appears you've made it into UA as well. Not surprising because of how powerful your quirk was. Sadly, though, they didn't do a background check on you, but thankfully the principal knows all of you've done. So I suggest you be more careful with what you do. You don't want yourself to be expelled from UA, do you? Because of your bad past and your bad personality, it really doesn't mix well with being a hero. You're more of an endeavor than an all might, you know that, Bakugo. As Bakugo would look up glaring at Izuku, as Izuku would end up laughing towards Bakugo, as the other students would be wondering who just exactly these two were. Remember, they really haven't met anybody else besides in the classroom. So one of them would end up calling down Aizawa, thinking that Izuku was some villain there, as he wasn't in the classroom the first day. So when Aizawa would end up walking in, seeing Izuku standing over Bakugo, who was glaring at Izuku, as Aizawa would just facepalm. Izuku, what did you do? Oh, nothing, really. I just showed Bakugo who's boss around here. Since Bakugo decided to act like a prick to me for the past, some years before I decided to disappear, I just decided to return the favor, that's all. As Izuku would end up walking away back to his room, as some of the students would end up asking Aizawa who exactly Izuku was, as he would just explain Izuku was another one of their students, and possibly one of the highest potential students he had ever seen walk through the doors at UA, as Bakugo would start to grind his teeth against each other even more. He got rid of Izuku once, he can surely do it again. How dare that stupid cat brat just be better than him? How dare Aizawa not speak highly of him, as he is clearly having much more potential than something like some stupid pet that Izuku is. So Bakugo would end up just marching off back to his room to just sit in a ball of hatred for the rest of the day. So when a week would end up passing, as all of the students would end up getting to know each other, they would end up walking back over to the UA main school building, as it was finally time for their school year to begin. And so they would end up making it in there, as Aizawa would tell them that instead of going to orientation, they are going to be testing their quirk strength, as Izuku would end up being had to just be the example. However, Izuku not really having any of that, as he really couldn't care less about school or learning, as he had survived many years without it, just having books. He really didn't care for much of an education further than that. Even though this wasn't an education, Izuku was still just not wanting to do this. He hadn't really tested his quirks beyond hunting, and he really couldn't bother. It was not a very good use of his quirks after all. Would you rather go out and make a good use of your time, say for example making money, or would you rather just spend a ton of hours doing something else that could have a possibility of making you more money in the future. That's just an example, as Izuku would end up just not bothering to do this. He really couldn't care, just like I said before, as Izuku would end up being given the ball as he would toss it up in the air before kicking it with his hind legs, as the ball would end up going somewhat far but not really, as Izuku would end up going back, sitting down before transforming back into his human form, as they would be just doing the rest of the test, as Izuku would end up transforming into a cat before hopping on to Momo's shoulder. He had grown just quite fond of he hadn't really grown fond of them. They had just been more open to Izuku and wanted to become Izuku's friend. I mean, this is a cat after all, and they really just wanted to have sort of a class pet. So Izuku was very friendly to the rest of his classmates, besides Bakugo. He also hadn't really met Todoroki at all either, so many of the classmates were just fine with Izuku hopping up on their shoulder in his house cat form, as they really enjoyed petting Izuku as he had very soft fur. So Izuku would end up just be sitting there before dozing off and not really doing any of the rest of the tests, as he had done one and would end up getting last in the test, as Bakugo would end up laughing who had gone first. So Izuku has the most potential, huh? How come he got last? Shush, Bakugo, Aizawa would say, as he had only done one of the tests before falling asleep, and coming from someone who is also very tired, I don't want to bother waking someone who can easily scratch both of my eyes out just because I decided to wake them up from their nap time a bit early. So they would end up walking back to the UA dorms, being dismissed by Aizawa, as they would end up carrying Izuku back there before just placing him on the couch, where he would end up waking up saying what he missed, as they would end up telling him that he just missed the entire activity and Aizawa really didn't care. And that's where I'm going to leave this what if off. I'm sorry that it's not exactly 40 minutes. It's just I want to get this video out before 6 p.m. Eastern time, and I really couldn't make it any longer than this, because it's going to take me a long time to edit this video, especially because it's sort of a longer video, and I might have problems with my editing software, as it hasn't really been working too much recently. So I have to have a lot of time before I have to have a lot of time to edit and do all the things in YouTube to make sure it goes up before 6 p.m. However, most of this series videos are going to be sort of the longer variant. Expect anywhere from 20 to 30 minutes instead of the 10 to 15 minute range. So I thank you all for watching once again, and goodbye.